Mathew, you are the lead in global climate action at UNFCCC, right? Can you tell us about the 6-year-old global climate action portal? To what extent this one-stop shop have enabled deeper climate action? To what extent it has the potential to inform the NDC review in 2020 and to ensure that they are more ambitious and that they can adapt to what we need?
Thank you. Hello, thank you so much for having me. Yes, I take care of the Global Climate Action Portal, which doesn't necessarily sound that thrilling or sexy, but it is incredibly important for kind of giving governments an indication of whether we're on track to meet our climate goals or not. So from that kind of perspective, it's absolutely critical. In terms of how we started, it started all around the Paris Agreement. And I think obviously we'd just come to get to the Paris Agreement, we have to remember from where we had come, which was the gridlock, the breakdown of the negotiations in 2009. And many of my colleagues and people working in this climate community are still kind of wearing the scars of Copenhagen. And I think one of the reasons that Paris was such a success is that governments realized that in order to get over the finishing line and get to a unanimous agreement, they were also going to need the voices and the impetus of what we describe as non-party stakeholders, but what in normal terms means the real world economy. So we arrived at success in Paris because businesses, investors, cities and regions got on board and said, governments, we're here and we're going to help you meet those climate goals. So you can go and sign that agreement with absolute confidence that we're going to collaboratively get this job done. So the Global Climate Action Portal was a space for all of that action from the real world economy to sit. It was a recognition tool, if you like, to try and give the space for that to happen. But you know, a recognition tool is fantastic. It helped get us the Paris Agreement. That's a wonderful thing. But a recognition tool can only take us so far. A recognition tool is like a collection of good intentions. We're about to approach the new year. This is the time when all of us will make New Year's resolutions. When I got to the beginning of this year, I said I was going to drink less. I said I was going to smoke less. I knew that there was going to be a climate conference in Santiago. Obviously, it happened in Madrid. I said I was going to learn some Spanish. I can tell you right now that if you kept track of my progress throughout 2019, I've made 0 progress on all of those 3 commitments. So the question is, we need to turn this recognition of good intentions and good commitments into a kind of tracking device. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to take stock of where we are. And it will just turn into a greenwashing exercise in the way that many of my fellow panels have spoken about. But there is a tremendous challenge with tracking progress. And again, this has been really the subject of the panel. There are so many competing methodologies. Everyone has their own idea about how this work can be best done. And so we have lots of different approaches, but we also have information which I describe as being insufficient. So our tracking can only be as good as the inputs that we receive. But as you've obviously already seen from the presentation earlier on through CDP and everything else, we actually don't really have a grand mapping of what's going on in terms of climate action throughout the globe. There is another issue from a United Nations perspective, because obviously this is a diplomatic exercise. It's about trying to get all of the governments of the world together to agree on something in terms of how they're going to achieve the Paris Agreement. And that's that as soon as you start tracking the progress of independent entities, whether they're a business or a country, you inevitably start to rank them. And when you start to rank them, you start to finger point, or by implication, to blame certain entities for not being as good as the other. And this obviously isn't a helpful exercise if you're trying to kind of function within an intergovernmental space. So what we need to do is find a middle road here, whereby we can track the progress of commitments, but we're not necessarily naming and blaming. And I'm very much talking from a United Nations perspective here, because obviously there are other people on the outside of the process that absolutely should be doing that. So I think everyone has their role to play, but from a Global Climate Action Portal perspective, what we would like to do is monitor the progress of what these actors are doing. And I think we can do that without necessarily blaming, but hopefully providing some measure of accountability there. Now, it's already been mentioned that there's a kind of key place that all of this non-party stakeholder momentum needs to do if we're trying to think about the Paris Agreement. And again, forgive me for using phrases like non-party stakeholders, because it doesn't make sense when obviously we're talking in a kind of public forum like this. But again, we're talking about businesses, cities, regions, and investors. So what we want to do is we want to take stock of what those actors are doing at a national level, and we want to stack that up and ladder up against that nation's NDC. Again, an NDC is what a country has committed to. It's its country's national climate plan. So Spain has a very good national climate plan, but there are also a bunch of organizations within Spain, including Iberdrola, obviously, and we want to see how those kind of commitments can help to spur the ambition of that national climate commitment. So the Global Climate Action Portal is, again, beginning to kind of get to that exercise to understand how really the non-party stakeholder commitments of cities, business states, and regions can help to add up to the national commitment. So again, this is a really, really complicated exercise. One of the things that we've tried to do at this climate conference in Madrid is we've held about 3 days of data workshops. And it's basically been a kind of collaborative forum where we've brought together all of the kind of research institutions, the data providers, the analytical community to have a big argument about how to track progress. And it went very well because there was a lot of argument about the best way to conduct this exercise, but the meetings were so long and the workshops kind of spanned like 12 hours, and people were so tired at the end of it that they just are now committed to getting the job done. So we've kind of come out of this workshop as of Thursday last week with a newfound commitment to basically bring our competing methodologies together in an aligned fashion by COP26 in Glasgow. And what we'll do is we'll start to have the first indicators of tracking progress by that time. It's very important that we do this now because obviously we are reaching this critical tipping point, which is 2020, when obviously we want emissions to peak, but spoiler alert, that probably isn't going to happen. So we really need to kind of push this agenda now and see where we're at. And there's another time frame that we need to consider in our sights, and that is that by 2023, we have the kind of intergovernmental global stocktake. So this is a moment when governments are going to come back to the table and again, try and see and assess where they are. And they're going to need to know if businesses, investors, cities, and regions are also stepping up to the proverbial plate. So we're trying to furiously and desperately, in a race against time, bring all of this community together to really understand how it can track progress. And we're trying to hopefully, as I say, make early gains on that next year, with the idea that by the global stocktake in 2023, we have fully quantifiable metrics realized. So anyway, that's the grand ambition. But again, there are some critical issues with getting there. Not just obviously trying to align methodologies, but also on the fact that we're missing a lot of data. I've been just come from a couple of workshops that said, these days we have an avalanche of data, and that's true, but we're not necessarily synthesizing it in the right way. So from our own perspective, we are continuing to miss a lot of data on adaptation, continuing to miss a lot of data actually on finance as well, although we are working with PRI and the TCFD and other colleagues to try and extrapolate that. We have very mitigation-heavy commitments at this moment in time. So we need to go through an exercise, again, to try and get better inputs. And I think this will come through better technology. So what we're going to have, I think, is a kind of combination of better voluntarily disclosed commitments, but also technology that can start kind of actually weaving together this information on its own. I sat down with a representative of a big Silicon Valley tech firm yesterday, and I was waxing lyrical about the Global Climate Action Portal and the plans for it. And she said, gosh, that's an awful lot of data that you're putting on the portal. You must be packing some big tech there. And I said, well, we have an enormous Excel spreadsheet behind that, which obviously it's primitive, right? And so I think we can work with these tech giants. We can obviously work with governments to be a lot more intelligent, to be a lot more smart in the way that we're kind of conducting this exercise. So again, that's something that we're looking to do. I think those are the main points from me. Basically, number one, we need to go from just recognizing progress to hopefully tracking it. And to do that, we're going to need to align our methodologies. We're going to need to be smarter how we're doing it, which is going to be about receiving both voluntary inputs, but also trying to use technology, machine learning in a more kind of smart fashion. And the final thing is, obviously, to do all of this, we're going to kind of need to compromise and collaborate across our kind of various institutional groups. And that includes, obviously, most importantly, the real world economy and governments. Thank you very much.